Hey guys, it's me, Dr. Jennifer Otter-Bickerdike, and welcome to another edition of the ITMI podcast. Today we have Jack from the Psychedelic Porn Crumpets on the show. P.P.C are an awesome psych band from Perth, Australia, and Jack actually took the call. We called him in Australia, which was crazy. And the band's part of the growing psych movement coming out of Down Under at this moment. The band is super prolific with regular touring schedules. They're actually coming back to the UK in October, and they just dropped their 5th release this last May. So in this episode, we talk about touring. I mean, it was crazy. He's talking to me from Australia, and he just got back from Japan 5 days before. Having your own indie label and vinyl. He dropped some names that made me very happy, like Gigi Allen and Jay Dilla, that have been influences for him. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Take care.
I think like California and Australia have so much in common. They're like pretty much the equivalent. Well, I'm English, so I've almost got sort of an outside perspective as well.
Yes.
So, but I've lived there for 13 years, so it's like I can definitely see the similarities in like that sort of surf culture, psych rock kind of scene. The music and sort of like it's always hot. It never really rains, so you kind of have that outdoors. Everyone's got like perfect bodies and beach tans. And you're there stuck behind a computer making music just white as anything.
Do you feel, when you come to England then, since you've been there for 13 years, I'm just thinking this is me just asking for my personal self, do you feel like you're in between places? And what I mean by that, do you feel like you're not quite Australian, obviously, but you're not quite British and you don't really fit in either? Or do you feel like you really, what do you think? I'm just asking because I really struggle with that myself.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely like this divide where you missed out on sort of that culture of like English sort of drinking in pubs and going out and growing up there. But then I suppose I missed out on the youth here, like primary school or middle school or whatever. So yeah, you sort of sit in the middle. But I suppose it's good because you can sort of fit in.
Straddle.
In both, in sort of both worlds. But yeah. I'll look at it that way rather than the pessimistic way of being like, I don't fit in at all.
Oh my god, I need some Jack like daily affirmation sent directly into my inbox. First question is about psych music. There's been a massive psych revival in the past 10 years, especially in Australia. Why do you think this is, and who do you think have been the influencers of this, both in Australia and just worldwide?
I'm like going to do like a PhD study on this. I think it's really interesting, but I think like my interpretation of it is basically when Wolfmother came out in like 2005, they did a tour with Dunyan, who is from Sweden. And I know for sure that when they played in Perth, I reckon the Tame Impala guys would have gone to that gig and sort of mixed up that two sounds of like Wolfmother's old sort of tone when they sort of re-emerged that 60s music. But Dunyan were doing it as well in more like melodic, like sort of with violins and strings and nice keys and bits and pieces. So I think when Tame Impala sort of got that or like moved on from both those genres and sort of even went further down a loophole, it just sort of solidified it. And then you had bands like Pond and King Gizzard, and at the same time over east there was like the OCs, Ty Segall, like, and I think once it sort of got to that point, then obviously from Portland, like Unknown Mortal Orchestra, it sort of just became like, well, that's how that's almost the new experimental music where you can just head into any genre, and then people just slap the Psych label on it, and you're like, here we go, like we're off for a little bit of a journey. So that kind of like, I don't know, the the crossover of genres from like 60s rock into more elaborate sort of experimental psych just sort of spawned this really cool genre that now is, like you said, it's booming, and it's still not really been fully discovered, which is great.
One thing you said there that I think is really interesting is this idea of the freedom in the music, and because it's experimental, it just gets slapped with that label. Is that a challenge, do you think? Like, one, the label being put on it, or not having structure? Are those two, is that one thing that drew you to it? Is that challenging? Do you not like the label? Like, what do you think about that?
No, I think it's great. I think like when we first started out, we were more of like, I suppose this joke punk band, because there were so many psych bands around. We were like, oh, like, what can we do that's kind of different? And then after a while, we're now this serious joke band, but but it's still sort of moving forward, where it's like, I suppose we are taking it seriously, but it's like, I think the music, if you take the music seriously, then you start writing within boundaries. I think you've got to be like, what wouldn't happen here, rather than what's the sort of classic way to approach it. And I think we took that with the third album, and then now it's like, obviously, like, we're back to like let's scrap all conventions, and how we sort of started writing more structured music. And I think definitely going back to that weirder way of writing just feels more fun, and it's definitely better to play live, because people, like, I don't know, they're sort of like on their toes while listening to it more, like, not so much like, I know exactly how the rest of the set is going. You want to start kind of keep that what's the word?
Well, it's like excitement. They don't know, like, the journey is not already written out, so they don't know what it's going to be, do they?
Yeah, exactly. And that's how I think the same way you should approach an album as well. It's like, how do we always make things different so it's more entertaining at the end?
I like that as a way to kind of go through life, because what you're saying is, when you started really thinking about it, in a lot of ways, it lost what was interesting and unique about you guys. I'm not saying totally, but that part is what makes it fun for you as well as for the audience. I think that's an important thing to look at. Why do you think that that music is so thriving in Australia? And do you think Perth is special for that?
I think it's definitely from growing up. Like, when you go out, it was like everyone goes and watches live music here. Like, all the pubs have stages, and it's rarely that you would head out and just go for a beer. It's like, usually there's like a local band, and there's like a strong local scene, so people sort of support that. And I think because we're so secluded, you rarely get like big international acts, or people skip Perth usually when they do like a tour of Australia, because it's just so far to come. So we sort of built our own scene, I suppose. So if there's like a band like Mars Volta or whatever, then you get like Carnival in its place, because they're like, well, we'll take it our way and go here, and we'll do our own sort of thing. And then everyone's like, wow, this is mad. And then I suppose when the rest of the world gets wind of it, or they sort of start maybe branching out into the rest of Australia, everyone's like, well, where did this come from? Because it's easy to sort of see the change here. Like, there's bands like Koi Child, and a band called Butter recently, and another band called Super Ego, who are so weird and diverse, that like, with horns and sort of they've got like a frontman rapper, and but they're like a full band. And I suppose America's probably the same. You go to like some small town, you see a band on like a Wednesday in Austin or something that's got like that kind of uni town vibe, and it's always going to be different. But I think if you grow up in a big place like London or some of those major cities, you get less of that creative kind of gel, and more straightforward rock bands, or straightforward sort of what do you call it, like, sort of ideas, because you're competing with like Elton John on a Monday night, or like Paul McCartney, or, do you know what I mean? It's like, no one's really you can't put a gig on a Saturday, because no one will come.
Well, I think also what I find about this too, that you're saying, is it reminds me of kind of pre-internet, and what I mean by that is there's a scene that people are really investing in locally,
Yeah.
and it can develop in terms of, before it really goes major around the world in a different kind of way, and people are invested in the people that are in that community because of that.
Yeah, you can definitely tell that unplugged from the world kind of vibe. It's such a sleepy town too, so I think, yeah, that hit the nail on the head.
Do you think you're going to stay there?
I spoke to a lot of people. I mean, it'd be really like romantic to be like, I live in wherever now, I don't know, like Greece on an island in Mykonos, but I think Perth has just got something like beautiful, that it's just, you can chill, and there's a huge hub of friends here that I've grown up with for 13 years. And I think even a lot of them moved to like Sydney and Melbourne, because they're the sort of more major cities where you'd probably get work and stuff, but everyone comes back for like Christmas and New Year's, so it's always good to catch up and have a good. It's really expensive. Like, beers are like $10. Everything's $10
in Perth.
Yeah, it's one of the most expensive places.
How do gigs compare in Australia to the UK? Are the crowds different?
I thought they would be. Like, from the start, like it's sort of, what do you call it? everyone's very more kinetic, I suppose, in Australia. Like, it's pretty wild. But then I think that was just because we were more developed, I suppose. We're playing to like bigger audiences than the sort of rubberneckers when you first go to a country where it's like 100 cap rooms. They're like, oh, what's this band like? You get such a diverse crowd of generations coming to watch. But now that I think we're more sort of settled into sort of touring, it's pretty much gone the same. It's like very wild. Like, people just want to sort of crowd surf and get into it. And I think it's funny too, because we're like, we have all these slow songs we want to play, and they're like, no. You're like, all right, like back to the heavy one. Yeah.
What is the gig economy like there? And what I mean, like here and it sounds like Perth may even be different than the rest of Australia. I could be wrong. There's a lot of small independent venues that are closing here in the UK, and that's a big issue because that's where, bands cut their teeth. What is going on with smaller venues there, where you are?
Well, we've got this weird thing where there's lots of small venues, but the gap in the market is your 1,000 cap rooms where your bands like, I don't know, like Growlers or the sort of bigger acts that sort of will travel, like Dunyan or whatever, those bands that sort of aren't ready to play like 2,500 cap rooms, 3,000 cap rooms. Like, that's the next big jump. You have like the sort of good room is about 650 cap. Then we've got the Astor Theatre, which is about 700 if you don't. It's like a theatre. If you have the top floor, then it's like 1,000. But that's one. Do you know what I mean? We've got like lots of little 300 caps, 450, maybe 600 cap rooms, and loads of like 200 cap rooms. But the best venue like recently in the last 4 years was this one called The Bakery, which shut down, and that was like where King Gizzard played and the OCs played, and all the sort of really good international sort of touring bands would come because they know they could just do 1,000 cap room in a sick venue. And now it's like, I think a lot of bands are coming here and doing like 2 nights in a 450 cap room, which is a lot different. Do you know what I mean? The sort of, it's great because it's a smaller venue, but
yeah, energy and everything is so much different, isn't it? For you and for the punter as well, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think you want to go, and sometimes it's better going to those 1,000 cap rooms there because if you don't want to mosh, it's like you don't need to. You just sort of can watch and admire rather than get your hair ripped out.
What do you think is important for gig etiquette?
I suppose like now there's like this big reform, and I suppose just making sure that everyone's okay. Like, it'd be amazing to see how G.G. Allen would go down like today, just throwing shit at people. And like, it's funny how like back in the day it was like you had these bands like Nine Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson and sort of this hectic like metal sort of scene that is really rare now. Like, even the metal fans now are sort of they're the nice gigs to go to. Like, they'll make sure that everyone's okay, I suppose. Like, and you're not there to sort of have a fight or rip someone's head off. I think having that sort of approach where it's still everyone can feel comfortable, I think, is sort of what's been changing in the last 2 years. And I completely love that. I think it's great, like, because you get more people to a show as well. Like, if they feel comfortable, they'll like not want to feel scared or feel like they're not part of that sort of scene. It's like more inviting.
No, I get that. You know what's interesting is I worked with both Nine Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson, and the evolution of the crowds and the scenes in that, like, definitely in the beginning, and especially I was with Manson from the start. It was more weirdos and goths and kind of outsiders, and so it was definitely a gentler, even though the music wasn't gentle, the crowd was different. And then it's like as you move into the more mainstream, it's almost like you get the fraternity bruvs coming in, and I mean, the same thing happened with Nirvana. So that's, to hear you say that is a kind of a counterpoint, and that's I like that. That's interesting. You are doing your own label.
Yeah.
What made you guys decide to do that? Was it because you'd have something else besides touring, or what? Why?
I think mainly it was so we could release our own music at sort of any time and not be pressured by another label or anyone else to sort of release it, or hold that sort of rights and retain our music and ownership of it. Which at the time, I think there were so many bad stories coming out about people doing these massive tours and coming home and not having any money, and then you're like, how you just sold like 1,000 records or 2,000 records or all this stuff, and then you sort of look at your account, you're like, well, we owe so much money to this label. And I think now we've got a pretty good deal when we work with Marathon. We're sort of like 50-50, I suppose. Like with them, it's helped. We have like almost this umbrella label. So I think we also had a lot of projects going on at the time. Like, it wasn't just Porn Crumpets. Like, guitarist Luke was playing another band, and I was in a band with him. And then I was doing solo stuff as well, like sort of these Raja beats, like Indian infused kind of like, I don't know, like kind of strange hip hoppy kind of stuff. But like, it was kind of like Dilla, but more. And it's sick. It's just like a cool other sort of way of just procrastinating, I suppose, making music. But then obviously the plan was to release everything under What Reality Records. But I think now it's like, because we're so invested in Porn Crumpets, everything sort of took a bit of a
backseat.
Yeah, it did. And so we're sort of just focusing on one thing because it's just completely taking all our time, which is great for me because it's sort of like, I suppose I've got loads of time to write. But I suppose for the other guys, they're like, what about my project? But
has vinyl been a big part of the success, do you think, for you guys, of why the label's working?
Yeah, I think that's probably the only reason we're still a band.
Really?
Yeah, for sure. Like, we were working originally, like, we just recorded the album. I did most of it in this barn I was living in at the time, and it was pretty much for nothing. Like, we had all the mics. I recorded the vocals with a SingStar mic. It was so DIY home job, and we just got this genius guy who lives in Perth to mix it and master it, and it came out sounding pretty good. So we're like, we'll just stick with that. And I think like 2 months went past, and it sort of got a little bit of traction in Perth, and then we managed to this guy who ran a record store called Dylan, who runs Rhubarb Records, he was like, well, I'm keen to press 500 records, and for us it was like, that was huge, like having new music onto vinyl. And I think from that, it just opened the floodgates, and we just sort of really went in head first with like all the different splatters and different gatefolds. And because my background's in design, so I really like, obviously, like publication and magazines and zines and bits and pieces. So to design like an album, whole vinyl like setup was great. And then I think we got sort of addicted to how it was packaged and how everything, how you could evolve it. And like, obviously King Gizzard was doing that at the time, and that was Radiohead, like doing all these strange packaging and having foil sleeves, and Jack White having his own sort of record manufacturing plant where he could just do whatever he wanted. I think it also, once we sold those records, gave us enough money to record the second album and actually up the production a bit. And we had enough money as well to do a first tour to Melbourne. So I think having that sort of revenue come in from the records sort of pushed us to travel as well with the music. And obviously now looking back at it, that is definitely how we sort of make, I think, all the money to afford to go and do these tours is through vinyl records.
So you're going to keep on doing the label then between other things then, it sounds like to me, from what you're saying.
Yeah, I think other bands, yeah, for sure. I think I'm focused on obviously writing more material for Crumpets, and Luke's doing his thing. But there's a couple of bands who've hit us up recently, and I mean, if we had unlimited budget, we'd sign everyone. Like, there's a band in Adelaide called Somnium, and a band called like Hobo Magic and Elegant Shiva over east who are great. And I think just having another band called Nala who've just released their record. But it's obviously like, as we're sort of getting more knowledgeable on this whole label thing, I think we just obviously don't have the budget to be like, here's $20,000 or whatever. Like, it's just so much money for them to actually be able to go into a studio or do it. So, and it's rare that you find a band that's already got a home studio set up that they just need a bit of cash to press the record. So it's quite a big game these days. And the turnover isn't as much as it is obviously back in like the 2000s, where you could just be like, oh, they sold 1 million records. Well, here's your Maserati. But you're like, all right, well, I'll pick you up in my go-kart and we'll go to rehearsal. So.
What are the plans for the label from here?
Well, I think Luke is he's pretty much finished like his little solo project thing. I think that'll be obviously for him, his sort of, his way forward, because I think he just wants to sort of get that project happening. But for me, it's like, I've always thought if I do a solo project, it's pretty much Crumpets anyway. So I'm just sort of not adding that music to the catalogue. So I think I'm completely happy with just coming home, and even like in this 11, I think we've got 11 days before we head back to LA. Yeah,
Oh my God, just 11? How long have you been how long have you been back for?
2 days.
Two
Yeah.
days?
I think it's full on. We just, I mean, we're still at the honeymoon stage of touring where it's amazing. I don't think, yeah, we're sort of getting off that period where you're like, obviously sharing your bed with everyone once a night is difficult, but sometimes you get a good bed and you're like, I have my own bed, and, and that's what we work for.
How like that is an intense schedule. How do you keep your mental health? How do you keep your sanity while you're doing all that?
I play a lot of chess in the car actually. I just got into that this tour because we got so many drives, like there's so many hours. Like obviously it's pretty beautiful driving around like Austria and Switzerland, and but obviously like going through some of the days where it's raining, it's like I think if you've got, I mean, you're chilling out really. A lot of the time we talk about what we can do and progress like our band and where we should record and what we should do, but I think sometimes like yeah, you probably drink a bit too much because you're just surrounded by alcohol. Like you play in a pub, you get given alcohol, people want to buy you a beer afterwards, and then it sort of leads to just these sort of sporadic nights, and then you wake up hungover and you sort of do it all again. So I think having a bit of time to, I mean, because I don't really like listening to music as well when I'm on the road, because you can't switch off from it because it's like your job. It's like there's obviously times where you switch off and it's like great, but I suppose that escapism when you're on tour like doesn't come from music as much. So, and you want to keep that sort of pace, I suppose. If you are working on a project like an album, then you're not going to watch a bunch of movies and change your sort of train of thought. Like you kind of want to keep that sort of mindset that you're in for as long as possible before you sort of start making. It sort of goes out the window, and then you have no idea where you started or what your original thought was. So, but I definitely do listen to music like now and again. I think it's just more so when I'm probably home or maybe on a plane ride. But in the car, yeah, I've been cranking chess.com.
Did you know how to play chess before this?
Well, I rarely play chess, but Danny, our drummer, he's amazing, and I've got this kind of competitive side of me that I'm like, well, if I lose, I'm just gonna spend like a month learning how to beat you. Like, just I don't know why. Like, I suppose I loved sports when I was growing up, and I think as well, it's like being kind of competitive is good. It kind of grows you as a person to try and achieve. So I think if you didn't want to achieve, you'd just be doing nothing. So yeah, I just downloaded the chess app and you can play it without 4G. So I was just there playing against the computer, and I realized that if you put it up to like level 3000, it just chews your battery because you're obviously playing this like supercomputer on your smartphone, and it is impossible to beat that supercomputer. So that's my new challenge: is one day I can beat an AI at chess.
What are some things that you guys did before you were on a label to be successful?
I think we just focus on the product. Like I suppose with anything, if you are, I don't know, if you're making something that you feel is like good, or if you're creating something like independently, then I suppose a lot of people will find it. Like I remember we just kept plastering SoundCloud, and we put our music on to Bandcamp and just all those free platforms. And I think it started growing from there just naturally. Like, and I don't think we were posting really on social media a lot, or trying to be like, we need this support gig because that's going to boost our career, or let's try and go here to this, like, those like big corporate sort of festivals they have for upcoming bands, and like Big Sound, or the one in England, what's the Great Escape. It's like, I feel like those things are just as unnecessary to go to if you like are planning on meeting like a manager, or planning on meeting like someone that's be like, I'm going to sign you right now. It's like, it just won't happen like that. So I think kind of keeping that I don't know, like hold of your own work, and also just trusting what you do release is hopefully good. It would be bad if you were releasing something you're like, oh shit. Just believing in yourself, I suppose. Trying to do it all naturally and progress naturally.
I mean, I think that there's so much pressure, especially like do social media and do this and do that. So it's when people always ask me like what are some tips, I always say playing out and practicing. And those are really even now. So for you to say that, who's had success in a social media driven environment. I think that shows that those still are two of the most important things then.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you think, how has a label helped you then? Like, what would you say are some of the benefits you found?
I think they've definitely managed to spread our music to places we never thought would get to. So like there was obviously when we ran it ourselves, we were just spending like weeks like packaging records and sending them out to like America, and I know we had some strange places like Kazakhstan and over
Really?
in Indonesia and bits and pieces, like, and that's just people finding it through Bandcamp or obviously through like Spotify or something like that, and then sort of going to our website, and it was like that. But I think the benefit of a label is definitely getting it into a shop. Like, so we never had any music in record stores before we started working with Marathon, and I remember we walked into Rough Trade and it was on the shelf, and you're like, oh my god, that's our record that we made. So I think that is definitely a benefit, and that way the people that do sort of scroll through, I don't know, the old cobs that still go record stores, even young people do. I've been in record stores, you're flicking through and you're like, oh, that's a cool little piece of artwork, I've never heard of this band. And you sometimes, like, I suppose back in the day people would buy it on a whim, but I suppose they're quite expensive now, records, to just be like, I'm going to have that even if you don't know it. But
yeah. Would you go back and like look on the, like, I love the we're seeing like Indonesia and stuff like that. Would you have different metric places where you could look on a map and see where people had heard or ordered the stuff from? Was that just like, would that blow your mind to see like the pins around the world of people finding your stuff?
Yeah, it is. It's like they got that Spotify for artists. Even just scrolling through that, it's got to like list the countries where people are from, and you're just like, I've never even heard of that country. Like,
yeah.
And then you sort of look it up, and you're like, there's like 3 people that live there, and one of them has heard the Porn Crumpets. What?
Yeah, one of them's our fan. One thing you wish that you could have told yourself at the beginning of the band?
I think we've always sort of realized that if you're in it for like the good time, then that will happen. But if you sort of start putting like monetary pressures on it, then you're gonna pretty soon like crumble, because starting out you were nothing. So I think maybe just, I don't know, I think I'm generally like quite happy with how everything has sort of come about. I think obviously don't trust the bands, and I suppose the people you're working with, you're always, not to sound harsh, but everyone can be replaceable. Like, if you lose like a label, it's not the end of the world. Go and find another one. Or if you lose like your sound engineer or something that you felt was integral, or a photographer who always been working with you, and then they go and get a different job. It's like everything is a step forward rather than a step backwards, if you think about it that way. So there's definitely been times I've been like, oh god, it's going to end because something's left or something's changed, or it's not met a deadline. That's another one, actually. A deadline can always be pushed back. Don't release something that's bad.
So better to be late and have a good end product than put something out that you're not super happy with.
Yeah, be like Tool. Just, even if it takes like 13 years, I think people, like fans, would be more appreciative if you said like, our album's coming out on September next year, and then it takes 4 years to come out. I think, if anything, you're building more hype. Like, I think your product the music will definitely be way better because of it.
Give us a little plug for your record that came out in May.
Well, it's kind of this 1940s English village fete kind of kinksy record that was supposed to be reimagined in the future and sort of lost its meaning in this kind of circus vibe, like festival kind of thing, but taking all that sort of tonalities from back in the in that sort of era, and then just shifting it. I think making it adding all that kind of sounds, but it sounds wrong, but futuristic as well in certain parts. But I think like that kind of went out the window of the whole concept of what happened, and then I think we just wanted to make the funnest record we could, or the most fun record that could be played at a festival. It's funny actually, because when we were in sort of around Europe and playing in smaller venues, like the songs were sounding weird, and we were like, why is this sounding like not? It's like, it sounds good on the record, it's just not working here. And then when we went and played them at the festivals, you're like, oh my God, they worked. Like, it's almost like this festival record, I think. It sounds better through a huge PA and through, like, a group of people than it does, I suppose, if you're playing it at your own shows, which is weird. I don't know why.
I mean, even the name, And Now For The Whatchamacallit, almost sounds like a party name. Like, it doesn't sound like a somber name at all.
Yeah. No, I'm really happy with it. And I think when we just played Summer Sonic in Japan, like, about last weekend. So it was like 4 or 5 days ago. Yeah. And it was, we thought would be in, like, this small little back room of this festival stage. And they were like, and here's the stage, and here's 10,000 people who have never seen you before. But the Japanese crowds are amazing. They will go and watch a band if they've never heard of them, and they'll be there and get into it. And everyone claps along there. It's like, if you just sort of, like, even raise your hand, they'll raise their hand. Or if you sort of clap, they'll clap. Or if you sort of headbang, they'll headbang. It's amazing. And there was, like, 10,000 people in this huge arena, just singing along, well, not singing along, but sort of like kinetically moving with the tracks, which was great to see. And it was the new album too, and I was like, oh, thank God it's working. So yeah,
I mean,
there's always that really.
Go ahead.
I was going to say there's always that really daunting feeling before you do release a record. You're like, oh, is it going to be the same? Is it going to do this? And obviously after releasing kind of like two, I'd say more sort of on the spectrum of metal than sort of pop, psych pop. It was weird. It felt like a step back at some times, like to go that way, because I think you knew you were gonna like gain more fans, but you're gonna sometimes lose some others. But I think now it's like, I think we're just, yeah, it's more comfortable. I think just being like, well, you want to do it, so just do it. And as soon as you start taking things seriously or think about other people, then you lose all your brain cells.
No, it's true. It's like you have to make a product that you're really, really happy and excited to make. But of course, it's terrifying. Like, it's terrifying sending something that you put all your blood, sweat, and tears and means so much to you out into the world. I mean, what I was going to say is it must just be so surreal because now you're back at home and just literally a couple days ago you were in a completely different country.
Yeah.
Having this was that the biggest audience you've played to so far? 10,000 people.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
What were you, when you like saw how many people were there, were you just like, oh my God, I'm gonna like throw up and have diarrhea at the same time? Or were you like, were you just like, yes, bring it on?
Yeah, no, I think the latter. Like, the more people is so much easier to play in front of. I think because when you play to like 4 people, their eyes are all on you. Do you know what I mean? Like, that is terrifying. Like, or 10 people. I think there's like that balance where it's like maybe like 200 people. Any less, it starts getting like kind of, there's a crowd, like, I don't know, you could say anything, and if someone like, well, the statistics, like, it's statistic based, isn't it? If you say a joke, like 1/5 of the crowd enjoy it, out of 10,000 people, that's 2,000 people, but out of like a crowd of 5, that's 1.
Where can we find you on social media? Where can we find the band?
On Instagram and Facebook, and on Spotify is probably your best bet because that actually has the music on it. So
just look up your name then on Spotify.
Yeah, Psychedelic Porn Crumpets.
Jack, I've absolutely loved having you on the podcast today. It's been fantastic. And October, we can look for you being here in the UK. Is that what you said?
Yeah, in October.
Fantastic. And again, the name of the record, can you give us one more plug for it?
And Now For The Whatchamacallit.
Fantastic. And it's available at Rough Trade, which is so exciting here in London.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, take care. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. And we look forward to seeing you super soon.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. It was a great interview.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the ITMI podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to subscribe, like, give us 5 stars, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies. We're available on all platforms, including SoundCloud and YouTube. If you have any suggestions, questions, or people you'd like to hear us interview for the podcast, then please drop us a line through our email address that's in the description. Thanks, and catch you next time.